I know you're wanting to listen to this episode of the Comics Alternative, but before we get started, let me just remind you guys that it's the gift-giving season. Now, that may be obvious, but one of the things that's not so obvious is that you can get all of your stuff and help out the podcast by going to comicsalternative.com/Amazon. Click through on our Amazon banner that you find on that page, and whatever you get during that visit to Amazon, the Comics Alternative will get a few cents kickback. So, whether it be Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, or Festivus, get your gifts through our Amazon Associate link. It's a smart way to get your books, and you'll be helping out the podcast. And isn't that what the holiday season is all about? Helping our podcast.
It's Hanukkah time!
This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Ed Brisson. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this interview episode, I have a fun conversation with Ed Brisson. His new series, along with Adam Gorham, The Violent, is going to be released this week, the first issue from Image. But before we get to that conversation, I want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some extra specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off, but often you'll find discounts that are definitely more impressive than that.
And you will find bundles like you would not believe. And it doesn't matter what you like. If you like DC, if you like Marvel, they've got you covered. Valiant, Vertigo, you got to go check out these bundles. They are great.
That's right. So go to their website, dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. Andy, I have a fun time talking with Ed Brisson. You know, as I mentioned a few moments ago, he and Adam Gorham have a new series coming out from Image. It's called The Violent. So we talk a lot about that, but we also talk about his upcoming series from Boom. It's a 4-issue limited series called The Last Contract. So we go into that, but we also talk about some of his older comics as well. For instance, Comeback, Sheltered, The Mantle, Murder Book, The Field. So we're just all over the place talking all Ed Brisson.
Well, I'm looking forward to this because, you know, like you said, Brisson's done an awful lot of stuff. So, yeah, this should be a good one.
Okay, well, let's listen to it. I'm pleased to have on the Comics Alternative Ed Brisson. His new series coming out from Image, The Violent, with art by Adam Gorham, comes out tomorrow, actually, December 9th. Ed, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You know, as I was telling you right before we started recording, it's about time that we have you on the podcast because we've talked about a number of your titles on the Comics Alternative over the past 3.5 years. So now you have a new title coming out from Image, The Violent, and this is something that I know we've highlighted in a previous episode, but we haven't really gotten into. So for our listeners, how would you describe the premise of The Violent?
Well, if anyone's familiar with the series Murder Book that I did before this, I've been saying that The Violent is sort of like the sister series of Murder Book. It's a similar sort of crime series, similar setting, but they're longer form stories rather than short stories like you had in Murder Book. My sort of go-to description for The Violent is that it's about desperate people doing desperate things to get out of desperate situations. But it's a sort of gritty crime series set here in Vancouver where I live, and yeah.
Yeah, and we have in this first issue this young married couple who have a kid, Mason, who's recently gotten out of jail, and then his wife Becky. And this is one of the things that I think sets up a really good crime story. Is one of the tropes in crime or noir narrative is someone comes back to their old haunts, whether they want to or not. And so the old haunt, so to speak, of Mason and Becky is their drug addiction. And we get a little taste of that, so to speak, in this first issue.
Yeah, that's, it's, you do get that. Like, you get these people who are essentially sort of broken people. They don't necessarily know how to be the people that they want to be, but they're trying really hard to be those people. Now that, they've got a daughter who's, I believe she's 3 in the comic, they're trying to kind of just hold it together and be better for her, at least, if they can't do it for themselves. And yeah, like it's not, addiction, is not a switch that you can just, turn off and all of a sudden you're clean, even if you do manage to get clean for a period of time. And they're also dealing with a lot of environmental situations that are very real here in Vancouver, where we've got sort of an out of control real estate market. Vancouver is actually the second least affordable city in the world to live. Property values themselves are out of control, which has sort of this downward pressure where, people who would normally buy homes can't buy homes anymore. So they're renting homes, which is causes sort of increased competition for rental properties, which has pushed rental property values through the roof. So, something that you could have rented for $800 10 years ago is now $2,500, $3,000. So, they're dealing with like trying to stay straight. They don't necessarily have the skills or education to to get good paying jobs. So they're working low paying jobs and they're working contrary shifts so that, they don't have to pay for childcare and, just trying to sort of scrape by in a city that's trying desperately to sort of push them out.
And we don't want to give away anything about the ending of this first issue.
Right.
But one of the things that leads us toward that ending is actually something that you've alluded to. Mason has a friend who has gotten drunk in this one bar, so he asks Mason, or Mason comes to get him. And this friend, what is his name? I can't recall.
That was Brett, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Brett. Sorry.
And he's drunk and he's ranting about the hipsters taking over the neighborhood, and now he can't even afford to go to the bar that used to be his old haunt. And so this is very much like what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. You get into that, and it gets into a little bit like as the series sort of goes forward, it gets into like sort of people trying to figure out why, how this is happening to them and how the city's changing and why, and looking for people to blame. And that, that goes in the book, it goes anywhere from to hipsters to, to immigration policies and all that sort of stuff. Which is like, and this is again not to, I gotta walk a fine line. It's not that I'm necessarily supporting those theories, but there are theories that the characters within the book would have, and it's something that's very real that's happening here, and part of I really wanted to make that come through in the story. Like I've talked a bit about before about. Part of why I want to set like Murder Book and The Violent here in Vancouver is that there is a lot of that sort of stuff that's going on that people might not be aware of if they don't live here, and it makes fertile ground for some tragic stories, I guess.
Wow. See, I was about to make a joke that hipsters are the new yuppies, but when you're bringing in heavy issues like real estate price and immigration issues, I mean, this is actually heavy duty and timely material that you're grappling with here in The Violent, and then also you focused on somewhat in Murder Book as well.
Right. And that's like the whole immigration issues is not really immigration. Just so to be clear, it's it's more what Vancouver's grappling with is foreign investment in the city that's sort of possibly contributing to the rising costs. Whether or not that's true or not, there's not enough real stuff. But this is like whether or not it's real is also sort of not important in the story. What's important is if the characters believe that it's real. So we're sort of moving forward from there. And yeah, the hipsters, yeah, it's kind of weird. They are and to be clear, I got no problem with hipsters or anything like that. But I've heard the sort of argument where they sort of move into areas and they sort of take over, and you can usually see which area is going to be gentrified next by when the art galleries move in. Because the art galleries here will sometimes just move into like really shitty areas. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm able to swear. They're really crappy areas.
It's okay.
And then all of a sudden, so stuff builds around them, and we have I've had like weird run-ins. I was just talking about the other day where I was walking down Main Street with a friend, and some hipsters got on our case because we were dressed up for something, I can't remember, and they seemed to think that we were wealthy, maybe, and that they were blaming us for the gentrification of their neighborhood, which is a neighborhood I've lived in for over 20 years, and these dudes had probably lived in for about 6 weeks. So it's weird. Like there's a lot of like animosity going around Vancouver, and there's a lot of sort of like potential problems that will be sort of future problems, I guess, that you can see on the horizon, you can see coming. They're inevitable, and going to sort of tackle a lot of those throughout The Violent.
Huh. So you're weaving this within the larger narrative.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of the larger narrative, now is this going to be an ongoing, or is this another miniseries of yours?
No, The Violent's ongoing. Adam and I are sort of discussing, like as we go. Like the idea is to do everything in 5-issue arcs. So, this Blood Like Tar is the first 5-issue arc, and then going forward, we want to kind of be fluid. And rather than making sure that a story fits the 5-issue structure, we're going to make sure that the story is served properly. So if we have a story that we really want to do, and maybe that's just a 2-issue story, we might just do a 2-issue mini arc. If there's something that's a 10-issue story, then we'll do 10 issues. We just want to make sure that we serve the story first. And don't take like a 2 or 3 issue story and stretch it out to 5 issues just to make those 5 issues. That's just, to my mind, that's just to the detriment of the story and unfair to the reader. So yeah, we're planning to build everything. Like trades that come out in the future will usually contain 5 issues, 5-6 issues, or whatever. So we'll make sure that we'll jigsaw things together to fit the trades, but we want to make sure that we're story first and then everything else second.
Now, are you going to be taking breaks between those individual narrative arcs or the 5 issues?
Yeah, I believe like with Image, there's sort of a new push to sort of take 2 issues off between arcs and use that time to get ahead, so that everything is constantly shipping on time. And then during that 2 issues, a lot of that's sort of been happening a lot anyway, because you will usually get after every 5 issues, the creative team will take 2 issues off, and that's when the trade will come out, and then they'll come back right after that trade. And that's sort of what we're going to be working towards. So after issue 5, which I believe comes out in April, we'll probably take May and June off, and then be back in July with the second story, which will be actually a separate story from the one that we're doing now.
Yeah, we've been noticing that with Image, and especially since the time of Saga, having that 5 or 6 issue story arc, then taking a month or two off, the trade comes out, and then using that time with the trade coming out to kind of re-energize everyone and to get the pump primed again, and then come back with that next narrative arc.
It's actually called the Saga Schedule.
Schedule.
That's how they refer to it all the time when it's being discussed. So
at Image, they refer to it that way?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
So you're spot on there with that. But it just helps the creative team get ahead because especially with us, we don't really have editors, so we have to self-manage. And something that may come as a shocking surprise is that creators are usually really bad at self-managing their time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, minus the editor, and holy crap, things can go to hell real fast. So having that 2-month gap is good, I think, for just trying to keep all the trains running on time. And we're going to use it just to keep getting as far ahead as possible, so that the last thing I want is, we want every book to ship on the day that we say it's going to ship, and not start late shipping, because once you start late shipping, it's almost impossible to catch back up.
Yeah, it's also a way to make sure that your readers don't jump off or don't get pissed off, because when it comes right, I don't know. For me, I get tired every now and again of hearing fans complain that something didn't come out when it was supposed to. To me, it's like, yeah, it comes out when it comes out. On the other hand, if it doesn't come out on schedule and there's an egregious break in the schedule, you could lose some readers. And so having that kind of built-in cushion of a couple of months, as long as the reader knows what to expect, then, I think you're all good.
Yeah, I agree. And, sometimes it's just stuff that is just unavoidable. There's like a medical issue will come up, or, whatever. Something happens. I think that's something that readers don't necessarily understand, is that some of the, Image books that do well enough to keep coming out, but maybe don't, are not setting the world on fire sales wise. It's got enough readers to support it, but it's not it's not Saga, or it's not, I don't know, it's not Paper Girls or something like that. It's not something that's selling a kabillion copies. It's not The Walking Dead. But it's paying for itself. So it's just staying out of that, cancellation danger zone. Sometimes those books are not making a whole lot of money for the creators. And so sometimes the artists on those series will have to take on some extra commission work or extra cover work or whatever it is that they have available to them. And that can slow down the process. But, that's also a way that they can make sure that they can, keep the lights on at home and still do the series. And so, it sucks. Sometimes you'll have these 2-3 month breaks in the middle of an arc. But, sometimes there is a rational explanation behind it. But the thing is once that starts happening, readers do just start jumping off like lemmings, and your readership will go down, which, it can create a vicious cycle with those lower selling books where all of a sudden the artist has got to take on more work, or the writer's got to take on more work just to pay the bills. And that will make the book later still, which means that more readers will jump off and, repeat ad nauseum. But for the most part, I think just trying to maintain that schedule, just take those 2 months off, get ahead on the book. If everyone can stay far enough ahead that, periodically artists or writer can pick up other work and still keep that book going on time.
Now, you were talking about your work at Image. You've done a number of things at Image. There's The Violent that is coming out. But you had, not too long ago, wrapped up The Mantle, which is a 5-issue series. And then before that, The Field. And then Sheltered, which ran for 15 issues. So your relationship with Image and your experience with them as your publisher of choice is, I guess, pretty darn good.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, The Violent's my 5th Image series since my first series was Come Back, which came out late 2012. So November 2012 is when the first issue came out. And I remember when Image first launched and being super, it's like pre-internet, and being just super, super excited about it. I remember driving down to the store on the day that Youngblood, which was their first book, came out, and driving back, I was with my high school girlfriend then, and we drove back to her friend's house, and we were supposed to go in and hang out, and I was trying to sit in the car and just read Youngblood because I was super excited for it, and she was trying to argue with me about something because that was just her hobby when we were dating, and and I just like, it ended up being something very important she was trying to tell me, and I was just ignoring, like, thankfully I'm not like this anymore, but I was just ignoring her so I could read this comic. And I was just like, listen, I'm not going to argue with you right now. I'm trying to read this comic. And it was just a bad scenario, but I was just, I was obsessed with Image for a long time when I was younger. And I remember, like, when they first launched, I still, at that point in my life, I wanted to be a comic book artist. And, I would tell everyone, I'm like, one day I'm going to draw an Image comic, one day. And, obviously that didn't happen, but, now I'm writing for them, which is, I prefer writing over drawing these days. So, I'm much happier to be there. Much like Image is that one company that from the moment that they launched, I always wanted to be part of. So, having, my fifth book coming up from them is both satisfying and also in a lot of ways super surreal. Every time I see that, like, Image Eye on a book alongside my name, it just, it still blows my mind.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your first Image book, and that is Comeback. So that was a 5-issue miniseries, and Michael Walsh did the art on that. And one of the things that I remember intrigued Andy and I when we reviewed it back in 2012, the first issue, was that it was an interesting take on time travel. And so I'm wondering if, where did the idea for Comeback come from, and if you have a particular interest in time travel or time narratives?
I think originally, when I was first thinking about time travel, because it's something that I usually time travel is something I like in concept, but rarely in execution in stories or fiction. And I was trying to find a way to make it interesting to myself. Back when Michael and I were talking about, like, pitching, the Comeback was actually our second pitch that he and I had done together. The first one didn't get picked up, but we were trying to. I had been pitching just kind of straight crime stuff up until that point, and was told by the publishers that, like, they just wouldn't pick up a straight crime book by an unknown creator. So I was trying to think of other things I could do that would be interesting, that would still incorporate elements of crime, and something that would, like I said, make time travel interesting to me. And I think one of the things that sometimes bothers me about time travel is that the time travel possibilities, while there are consequences, it's usually, like, infinite. You can go back and, kick it with the dinosaurs, or, go 200 years in the future. And that sort of thing, where almost anything is possible, is just super boring to me. So what I wanted to do, what I thought would be interesting, is if you had time travel, but it was super limited, almost to the point where it's underwhelming. Like, you can time travel, but you can only go 68 days into the past, and you can't go into the future. Like that sort of thing. And then, what would you do with that? Like, how could that be exploited? How would people exploit it? And it just sort of built from there. Like, I just had this, I don't remember why I came up with 68 days. But the idea of people going back and rescuing sort of, deceased, relatives or loved ones, and bring them back to the future, and then having to run off and live this sort of, secretive lifestyle. That was pretty interesting to me, and then just sort of developed it up from there, talking to Mike as we went. And I think, and then we pitched it. I think we pitched it in 2011, almost a year before it came out is when we pitched it. And it was, it was exciting. It was one of those, it was kind of a weird thing that as Michael and I were working on it, like I think that was like my 8th or 9th pitch to Image, and I usually had a good feeling about pitches as I was sending them off. But there was something about Comeback when we sent it off where like Michael and I were kind of like, yeah, this is the one. This is it. And thankfully it worked out that way. And yeah, I guess that's that answered your question, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
you were talking about the limitations of time travel in Comeback. Well, another limitation are the potential health consequences.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why they in the series, if they're rescuing someone, it has to be somebody who died accidentally and not through natural causes. And there's that whole health check to make sure that someone doesn't have cancer or whatever, because the time travel exasperates that sort of condition, which is something we didn't get to play around with as much as I would have liked to in the first 5 issues. We had that one nice scene, but yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and another thing I appreciated about Comeback is the fact that you take this larger idea of time travel, a grand idea, and you anchor it in not only real world consequences but also business, day to day, paying the paycheck consequences, which I enjoy. It's one of the things I liked about this another Image series, Cowl, is they took the larger ideal of the superhero and they made it a working class comic, a working class idea. And so you do something somewhat similar in Comeback, a few years before. So I like what you did with time travel, because you're right. It's almost like I guess it's similar to people getting tired of superheroes who are all powerful. Someone like a
Right.
Superman taken to the extreme. And if anything is possible, then it's no longer interesting. Same thing with time travel, as you point out. If you can go anywhere, forward, backward, past, future, then it all becomes ho hum.
Yeah.
But you put certain limitations on it, it adds dramatic twists.
And I also feel like part of that is that like about 10, 12 years ago, I used to make I took a break from making comics for a while, and I made a bunch of like just short micro budget films, like 10 to 20 minute short films. They're not particularly good, but I still have this mindset of like budget when I was doing that, which I think sort of carried over a little bit to Comeback, where like like if I was making a movie back then, I would have like had to by default put those sort of limitations on the time travel, because we wouldn't have been able to film 1940s New York or some sort of futuristic landscape. So I feel like I've got that, sometimes have that sort of mentality like by default. Mm-hmm. I did have that. I remember talking to an editor back when we were developing that, and he liked a lot of my pitches, but he kept saying he's like you never really go for like super high concept stuff, man. You gotta go high concept, and it's always like a term. He's like, think of it like as a film with like no budget, and I'm like that sort of stuff again it's a little bit boring to me sometimes. I love having limitations on things and rules applied, and then forcing yourself to work within those constraints. And I think that you get more interesting stuff out of that.
Yeah. Now, you revisited time travel more recently with the series that you did with Simon Roy, The Field.
Yes. Yeah, that was a whole other feel to it, but still, it was like limited time travel. It's just like this Groundhog Day style situation, but yeah, no, that one was a lot of fun. That one was a weird project because that started out as sort of like a Twitter prank. I go into a bit in the back of the trade, but what had happened is I'd gone out drinking with some friends the night before, and as sometimes happens when I'm out drinking with friends, is I just wander away in the middle of it, and someone had put on Twitter that I just walked away from the bar, and that I always pay my bill though. That's the weird thing. I'll pay my bill and then leave. I'll walk out. So it's just And
you won't tell anyone. You'll just leave.
No, I'll just go to the washroom and I'll pay my bill and I'll just walk out the door. My brain's got this thing where like it's like time to go home, and it's all of a sudden I just go on autopilot and I'll just leave. Anyway, so we were out, and the next day on Twitter, someone had posted that Ed Brisson last seen at St. Augustine's pub. if seen, please contact RCMP or whatever it was. And then one of the news, comic news sites picked it up and ran it as well, that I was missing, fully aware of the joke that I was not really missing. And I slept in really late the next day. And so I didn't see this until hours after it was up, and there was a few people asking about it. And when I saw it, I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm just going to kind of run with it. And I just started doing a series of tweets about having woken up in a wheat field in the middle of Saskatchewan, which geographically is about, I don't know, 1,500 kilometers, probably like 1,000 miles from here. So not anywhere close to where I live. And yeah, I started a bunch of tweets about waking up naked in a wheat field in the middle of Saskatchewan. And it just kind of went on from there, where I had to like fashion some clothing. I think I stole clothing off a Scarecrow, and I got picked up by this dude who was snorting meth and selling Bibles, and he dragged me along on this murder spree. I think he actually hadn't murdered until late into it, but I kind of kept this up without breaking character for about 2 days. Just periodically popping onto Twitter to give an update as to where I was, and it caused this weird stir where like I had like family members calling down here to talk to my wife to make sure that I was okay. Cause they came in later to it and just saw that like some guy was holding me at gunpoint in his car, and they were freaking out. But yeah, I did it for about 2 days, and then I was like, oh, and like, I started really sort of looking forward and sort of planning forward with the tweets. And then at one point I was like, oh, like this story for a comic started to sort of break loose. And I just stopped doing the tweets and wrote the comic out, and then approached Simon, who, I've known for a few years, about drawing it. And yeah, there you go. Like that 4-issue thing. And that one was always set to just be the 4 issues. Just that one story sort of in and out, and just sort of craziness, and just wanted it to the way I sort of describe it is I wanted to feel like that sort of that movie, when you're like Saturday night, it's 2:00, you can't fall asleep, and you just turn on the TV and you see some just like batshit insane film that you didn't even know existed. That you only find on cable at 2:00 in the morning. I wanted it to sort of feel like that. And, I think it came across that way. I was really happy with how that project came out.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of describing it. That movie late at night on a Saturday, and you're not able to figure out, what the hell's going on, because, from what I remember, it's not until the fourth issue, at least for me, that things started to really come together. You could try to put pieces together after the second and then into the third issue, but for instance, that character Christian who picks up the protagonist,
right?
And in fact, in the book, he wakes up in the field with tidy whities, and so in your Twitter narrative, you were completely naked.
Yeah.
This character Christian is just whacked out, and trying to figure him out is basically futile until you get to that 4th issue. And even then, there's a lot of mystery by the time that you end that series, but in a good way.
Yeah. Well, I think like by the time it ends, you've got enough information to know what's going on. Like, why Christian's doing this, why the smoke eaters are after them, and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, like it was a weird one, like, because when it ended, people wanted us to do more, and I'm like, really just told the story that we wanted to. But I do like doing that style of story. Like, I have like a real dark sense of humor, and I think more than anything else I've written, that comes through most in the field. And so there are other projects that I want to do, like sort of in a similar vein. I have one that I'm working on actually today that will be coming out sometime next year. I can't really say too much about it, but it's a project that's similar vein, sort of like that sort of B movie sort of feel to it, that I've been planning since I think like 2010, 2011. It's the same, just crazy, sort of over the top. The narrative is a little bit more straightforward. You know what's going on, but it's, it's a much more in that same vein as The Field, though.
Yeah, you're right. The Field does end in a way that, at least I had no question that there was not going to be a follow-up, or there didn't need to be. Now with your more recent series, The Mantle, that 5-issue series, that seems to me that it ends in such a way that if you wanted to continue it, you and Brian Level or whoever you work with, that you could pick up The Mantle, so to speak, again.
Yeah, and that's the plan. That's the hope. The Mantle was one of those things that was a gamble doing a superhero book through Image. Because, people get enough superheroes through Marvel and through DC that usually when they're coming to Image, they're coming for something different. They're not coming for a superhero book. So it was sort of a gamble, and it did okay, but unfortunately didn't do well enough that we could have gone much longer with it. Mm-hmm. But we knew that going in, so we sort of packaged the first 5 issues as like if it's not the next Invincible or something like that, then at issue 5 we can just park it for a while. But we did leave it open ended because it's one of those ones that like maybe a couple years down the line or a year or two down the line, where Brian and I are maybe in a better position that we can sort of take some time to do that, or if we want to approach it some other way, that we could come back to it and do more stories with it. I certainly would like to. I do like the characters and the story. But yeah, the story that we were most concerned with getting at there, involving them, was the one that we did get at there, which is in those first 5 issues.
Now, the longest series you've had so far with Image is Sheltered, and that's 15 issues collected in 3 volumes. Did you know that was going to be a 3-volume story? Did you have an end point when you guys came up with the idea? How did Shelter evolve?
We had hoped it was going to be a 15-issue series going in. When it got greenlit, I think it got greenlit for 5 issues. And we kind of did this like hope against hope that the first issue sells well enough that we can get greenlit for more. Because if we had to tell that story in 5 issues, the 5th issue would have had to have been like 150 to 200 pages. It just would have been nearly impossible. But yeah, Johnny and I developed that together. Like he lives locally here, and we'd been talking about working on a project together. We'd done a couple murder book stories together, and we had gone to we'd gotten a 6-pack and gone to the studio and just basically each brought 3 different ideas to pitch at each other for something we could develop. And we weren't into any of the ideas actually that we pitched back and forth to each other. Like, I wasn't really into the things he was pitching. He wasn't really into the things I was pitching, and like there was a couple that we kind of played around with a bit, but we weren't really feeling it. And it was literally like I was getting up to go home, and I was like, I've been reading a lot about doomsday preppers lately, and I think there's like, there's an episode where of this show called Doomsday Preppers where this couple bring their like 8-year-old daughter out to like a shooting range, and at that time I think would have been 2013, 2012, 2013, somewhere around there where we pitched it. My own daughter was like 6, 7, somewhere around there, and just the idea of like putting a gun in a kid's hand who was that young just disturbed me. I'm not a big gun guy anyway, mm-hmm. Which I know I tend to write a lot of stuff that involves a lot of guns, but in real life I'm a pretty pacifist. Seeing that, and it just sort of I mentioned to Johnny, and it's like these like I just wonder like what that life is like for those kids who are raised in this environment where you're being prepared for, a massive cataclysmic event or the end of the world. And like how badly as a kid, like if that's what you believe, like how badly do you kind of want that or buy into that? And he really liked that idea. And then we kind of sat back down and sort of talked it out a bit. And, we actually came up with the ending to the series first, and then almost moved backwards from there. And yeah, it's, and then we just, once we had the ending, like I said, we kind of moved backwards, and then, when we figured out where it was going to start, what the middle was like, and then we kind of just pushed it forward from there. There were things that changed throughout the series as we were actually producing it, but, the ending stayed exactly how it was from that very first meeting that we had.
And the reason I ask about kind of an endpoint from the beginning that you had is, for those of us on this side of the comics experience, the consumers, those who read, not the creators. Sometimes it's a big mystery as to why something is not announced as a miniseries, and then toward the end or maybe in the middle, all of a sudden they start listing it in previews as one of 5, whereas before you thought it was ongoing. A couple of recent examples of that out of Image are Brian K. Vaughan's We Stand on Guard, and then Jeff Lemire's Plutona. Neither of those were listed as limited or mini-series at the beginning, and then it was only, 2 or 3 issues in or halfway in that we found out that they were. And so I'm wondering, is this a decision with creators that is made as the series unfolds and they're discovering, for whatever reason, maybe financial, maybe in terms of life issues, that they couldn't or don't want to really sustain this as an ongoing? Or is it just a creative choice that they decide, or that you guys decide not to mention this as a limited series at first and then just see what happens?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because the thing is, if you're on the fence as a creator and you want to do a series, and you're smart enough that you've built like sort of an escape hatch in issue 4 or 5, where if it's not doing well, or if you have to exit for some reason, that you can still give a satisfying ending, but your hope is to go longer or further with it. That's kind of, sometimes you just need to see how it's selling out of the gate. Because the last thing you want to do is commit to doing like an ongoing series, and then all of a sudden, at issue 6, 7, 8, whatever, there's no money coming in at all, because it's just selling enough to pay for the print run and the other associated fees. I think with miniseries, sometimes people will say, okay, like this is a 5, we've got this 5-issue arc, like say with the Mantle, right? We've got this 5-issue arc that we want to tell. But our hope is that, like, if it sells well enough, we can go beyond and, do 100 issues or whatever. But one of the things that happens is if you list something as a miniseries, it doesn't tend to sell as well, because a lot of readers will see it as a miniseries and then just say, okay, well, I'm going to hold off and buy the trade, which is fine. That's their choice, right? But the problem is, if you want to keep it going, if you can get those sales, then it's dicey. Is it really a miniseries or is it not? So if it's something that you're hoping to keep going, then you don't necessarily want to list it as a miniseries, even if you have that backup plan of ending it at 5 if the sales aren't there to back up going further. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely makes sense. From the creator's point of view, I'm one who sometimes I trade weight and sometimes I don't. It all depends on, I guess, the series, the creator, but also my financial situation at the time and what I'm able to do. I definitely see where you're coming from there. Now, you mentioned when you and Johnny Christmas were coming up with the idea of Sheltered, you had been reading a lot of doomsday or survivalist narratives or news. What brought you to the doomsday stuff to begin with?
Actually, what it was is I've talked about it a bit already, but I'm a huge film fan, and I really like I really like a lot of foreign film. I tend to like a lot of film that would be considered like more sort of high art film, but I also really love like low grade, B films or cult films or horror films or like just crappy sci-fi films. Right now I'm watching like the Enzo Castellari sort of 1990 Bronx Warriors, which is like a ripoff of like the Warriors, Mad Max, and the Exterminator, all rolled into one sort of juicy Italian production. So I like that, and like sort of I realize sometimes I talk about film a lot. Like I love both comics. I love comics, novels, and film. Those are my three sort of passions. Creator-wise, I'm really only really interested in creating comic books. But when I was in university, I went to University for Fine Arts because back then I still wanted to be an artist. And I remember talking to one of my teachers about it. And back then, they really just tried to discourage you from getting into comic book art. One of the things I remember one of my instructors telling me that kind of stuck and stays with me today is that, like, if you're interested in like one media, the best thing for you to do is sort of try and bring in your influences from other media or other sources, so that you're not just kind of regurgitating, comic stuff over and over again. And I'm far from unique in this. A lot of people do this, but this is like I find that one of my biggest places that where I'll pull influences from are films, and especially. And I'm tangenting here a bit, but I really have a soft spot for like really crappy post-apocalyptic films. Anything set after the bomb or after societal collapse, I love. And so back in 2012, I was trying to figure a way to develop I wanted to develop a post-apocalyptic series. And I had this idea, and this might have been one of the ones I pitched to Johnny, I can't recall, where I wanted to do a 15-issue thing that covered 3 different stages of the apocalypse, of like a nuclear apocalypse. So it would be like the eve of like when the shit started to go down, and then the immediate sort of like fallout where society's destroyed, and then the third would be like sort of the rebuilding of society. It was like this sort of sweeping thing I wanted to do, but part of my research for that is actually wanted to find out how people were preparing, like these people who really believe that the end of the world's coming or that a cataclysmic event's about to destroy most of humanity, how they were preparing and how they were planning to cope after. And so that's why I was studying a lot of doomsday preppers, reading as much as I could on them. And there's like a million doomsday prepper podcasts that I was listening to just nonstop. And it was mostly for research for a post-apocalyptic thing I wanted to do. But then I just got so interested in the prepper culture that I thought, there hasn't really been anything done about that. And it's really interesting. It would be a really interesting setting for a story. And, we kind of just picked up from there and sort of ran with it.
And I'm glad that you guys created a pre-apocalyptic tale, as you say in that, or you said in that title, and not so much post-apocalyptic. One of the things that my co-host Andy and I mention every now and again on the Comics Alternative is the fact that, I guess in media in general, but especially in comics, I mean, right now it seems that post-apocalyptic tales are a dime a dozen. So I guess this is something similar to what we were talking about in terms of the time travel, right? Instead of dealing with that larger grand idea of time travel, you limit it in some way or give it a different twist. And in Sheltered, that's what you guys did with the apocalypse. You told us the lead up to the apocalyptic moment, so to speak, and what people do before that, which I think is refreshing, given the fact that every time you open a copy of the monthly previews catalog, you can count on at least 3 or 4 post-apocalyptic comics coming out.
Oh yeah, and I still fully plan on doing a post-apocalyptic comic at some point. It's just finding a way to make it interesting, because it's really, when it comes down to it, the post-apocalypse is just a setting for a story, rather than I think the one that I'm sort of roughly planning right now uses it as a setting rather than a catalyst for a story, which may be the difference. Or may not. It might not be up your guys' alley, but it is like I said, it's something that I do find interesting. But again, like time travel, it's a lot of the stuff that comes out is just sort of for the longest time you get like Mad Max sort of knockoffs, and I'm sure that with the latest Mad Max coming out, usually that you'll see. Oh, can you hear that siren?
Yeah.
Sorry. Usually with like films like that coming out, usually about like 7 months to a year later, however long it takes people to put together a pitch and then have something greenlit, you'll see sort of some imitation style things coming out. But I don't know. I think it still can be made interesting, like a post-apocalyptic setting. You just got to find what's interesting and what's unique about it. And sometimes just treating it as a setting rather than, like I said, the actual center of the story might be the trick.
Well, a genre that you've done quite a bit of work in, in The Violent, coming out this week, being one of those titles, is something that we will see next month, and this is Last Contract. Now, this is going to be coming out from Boom Studios, and you were telling me before we started recording that first issue is going to be released on January 13th?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So, I've had the benefit, thanks to Mel at Boom Studios, of reading an uncolorized, albeit uncolorized, but a version of the first issue, and this really looks exciting. So what can you tell us about the first issue of Last Contract?
Well, first of all, how amazing is Lissandro's art on that? Like the ink washes and everything. I've been asking Boom to like hang on to. Just because they do those pen and ink editions, and I'm hoping that the last contract does it well enough that they'll release a pen and ink edition of the first issue of that, because I love that guy's art.
And I'm glad you mentioned, and this is Lisandro Esteran.
Esteran. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce his last name. I can spell it.
Yes, because when Mel sent this to me, and he said, kind of in a apologetic way, "I'm sorry, but this is not colorized yet," and I read it and I thought, damn, given what this is, do you need to colorize it? Because given the crime tone to the book, it would do really well in just black and white.
I wish, I honestly, and this is not to discount color at all, or colorists, but I really do wish that it's a really hard market to sell black and white books in. It's kind of weird because one of the biggest selling comics right now is a black and white comic, but in general, it's really hard to get people interested in black and white books. And I've seen that firsthand. I worked at a comic shop for a little bit last year, and people just seem really bummed out by black and white, which I don't get. That said, so about the last contract, what was the question? I totally tangent it. Went off
what can you tell us about this first issue? What can we expect?
Yeah, so this one is more, whereas The Violent is more of like a gritty sort of urban, family-centered sort of crime. It's almost like I don't want to say it's like a drama because I was going to give the wrong idea, but it's not like a typical crime story, I don't think. Whereas Last Contract is the opposite. It is like hitmen and gangsters and double and triple crosses going on all over the place. It is a bit of like weird fantasy fulfillment for me, where like we open the series with the man, and he's living who is never named throughout the series. This guy is just in the script. He's just called the man. He doesn't have a name. We find out soon enough that he's got this sort of shady history, and he's unfortunately pulled back into his own old lifestyle, as it tends to happen in this sort of series. But yeah, he lives in Cumberland, which is like a small town on Vancouver Island, not far from here, which is kind of where I would love to just move and disconnect from society as well, and sit and just write my comics and go down to the local coffee shop, once a day and talk to the locals and go back home. But so yeah, he lives there. He gets pulled sort of back into this lifestyle. The thing about the man in the book is that he's this is a mild spoiler here that you find out pretty quick. He's a retired hitman, but he's like deeply retired. He's been out for like 20 some odd years, and he's about 80 years old. And so what was interesting to me again about this is here's this man who's 80. He's not like, you'd see like, say, what's that? Taken, that Liam Neeson series where like he's this ex CIA or whatever. I can't remember what he did in those films. All I know is he has a special set of skills. Mm-hmm. He's retired too, but like he's like this crazy Terminator Bruce Lee style dude who just goes out and destroys people. And again, like that to me is like, it's just not super interesting. So like when I was trying to develop something, like what would make this guy stand out? What would make him interesting to me? And the idea that he's 80 and he's like a hard 80, he's a real 80-year-old man. He's not like a, comic book or movie 80-year-old dude. This guy's got, like he's got a crappy hip and his memory is slipping like crazy. And, he's not the kind of guy who's going to karate chop someone in the neck, and do any sort of damage. And so he's got to get by on his wits, but even his wits are diminishing in his older age. And I just thought it would be interesting to do this sort of story about this guy trying to. I don't want to give away what his ultimate goal is, but obviously one of them is he just wants to kind of be left alone. And I just thought like having that sort of character, this kind of older guy as the sort of center of it makes it interesting to me anyway.
Yeah. Now, I know one of the things that struck me about that title when it was solicited, and I think it was last month in previews, is the fact that it was solicited in the Boom Studios section and not the Image section. So why this title at Boom where your other 5 that we've been discussing have been at Image?
Well, I've did a series called Cluster at Boom that just wrapped a couple months ago. I've been working with Eric and Cameron, who I like them both, and I wrote Sons of Anarchy for a year over at Boom as well, and I like working with them. And they'd sort of approached me about pitching them some stuff a little while ago. When I pitched Cluster back in, I guess 2014 is when I pitched it. That one was a thing where they had Damien, who I'd worked on Sons of Anarchy with. They wanted him to have a creator-owned book. And wanted to know if I'd be interested in working with him on a creator-owned book. And Damien and I go back to like 2004, probably. He's the first artist I ever tried pitching books with. So I really just want to work with Damien. Or I was really excited to work with Damien on a creator-owned thing because we had tried for, I think 4 years together to pitch books and never had anything sort of picked up. And then we kind of went, he started to get some freelance work, and then, I sort of went my own way a little bit, and then it's just cool that like 8 years later or whatever, we came back and got to do a book together at Boom. But they did ask me to do a follow-up to Cluster if there's something else I'd be interested in doing, and I don't know, it was just one of those things where I had some ideas, and it's funny, like the ideas that I had. Nothing was really sticking. And once again, it was like that sort of sheltered situation where I was like, they're like, well, do you have anything else? I was like, and like, almost like I had just a very small inclination. Like I wanted to do a hitman story about a retired hitman pulled back into it. And, the guy is like this 80-year-old dude living on the island just by himself. And, he's pulled back in, for reasons I can't say for fear of spoiling. Mm-hmm. But like, it was literally one of those that I sort of just pitched off the cuff and hadn't really had much of a chance to explore. It was just these ideas that I guess had been bouncing around in my head for a little bit, but not anything I'd put down to paper. And it was, sure enough, that's the one that stuck. But yeah, like I've got a good working relationship with Boom. I've been doing stuff with them for a few years now. And, they wanted, like the idea of doing a 4-issue miniseries. Yeah, it just seemed to make sense, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And now that you mention this, we did look at issue number 1 of Cluster earlier this year. It was another one of those episodes where my co-host and I looked at several new number 1 issues. And I guess we've tended to do that with you. That's how we first discussed Comeback, and it's also how we discussed Cluster. So yeah, working in both Image and Boom, and then also Dark Horse, because this brings us back to something that you have referenced several times in this conversation, and that is Murder Book. Now, did this start as a website?
Yeah, Murder Book started out with the whole sort of story behind Murder Book was, as I mentioned before, I'd been pitching a lot of stuff to publishers, and nothing was sticking. And I had like 2 like really close calls.
Close calls?
With pitches where like one where it sounded like the pitch was picked up, and then there was sort of an administrative change at the publisher, and my pitch got lost in the process. And then the person who had proved it wasn't in charge anymore, and there hadn't been anything signed, and the person who came in said that was not, it didn't really fit with the way that they're taking the company. So I'd had all these sort of really close calls with almost getting picked up, but not quite. And I was getting really frustrated because I don't know, I'd done like 8 or 9 pitches where, you put together your 5 pages of fully completed, like colored, like penciled inked, colored lettered art. You have your cover art. You've got your synopsis and your whole pitch package. And I was sending out a lot of these and not landing anything. And I kind of got really frustrated. It was actually on my birthday where I was walking around. And every birthday, I think from like my 32nd birthday on, I usually just mope on my birthday. And so it was my 35th birthday, and I was really just kind of bummed out with where I was with everything. And so I just said, you know what, screw this. I'm not going to pitch anymore. I had this plan, which was I called it that. I said that for just a year, I'm going to stop pitching. I'm just going to show and prove. I'm just going to sit down. I'm going to write the stuff I want to write. I'm just going to do short stories. I'm going to find artists who will draw them. I'm just going to put them up online for free. Because I do think one of the things about, like, if you're doing your own indie work, with a goal to hopefully get in with a publisher down the line, sometimes, putting together these short projects and trying to make money off of them is almost a losing proposition. Mm-hmm. And for me, and everyone's got their own approach, and maybe for some people it'll work out. But for me, what I really wanted to do was just show I could do the work, try and build my own readership outside of having a publisher, and then have a website where which basically could serve for editors, if they were surfing around online one day and stumbled across it or whatever, they could see a bunch of stuff I'd written. And so yeah, that was Murder Book. I wrote the first Murder Book story on my 35th birthday, and then revised it a bit over the next week, and I knew Simon already, so I was able to get him to draw it. And I just did that for like a year and a bit, and that's what put me on publishers' radar. I started getting emails from some publishers who'd read Murder Book who started asking me to pitch stuff to them. And so it worked in a way that my pitches weren't working. Still, from there, it took a few pitches before anything stuck with a publisher. But, that was me just doing the work, but also just doing this kind of stories I wanted to do. So I'd already heard several times from publishers that crime books don't sell, and crime books are a hard sell. And that's what I was really interested in doing. So I said, screw it. If I don't have to worry about how they're selling, I'll just do it, and I'll do it for myself. And I just did stories that I'd want to read and stuff that I was really interested in, and that seemed to resonate with people. And so, I self-published that for, I guess, 4 years before Dark Horse. I met with Jim Gibbons, who is no longer at Dark Horse, but was at Dark Horse up until about 6 months ago, I guess. And I met with him at a convention, and I gave him a couple copies of Murder Book. That I had some print copies, and Dark Horse offered to put out to commission 4 new stories from me for Dark Horse Presents that would serve as sort of a lead-in to a collection. So they collected everything into one volume, which includes like the 3 print editions I put out, and then about like 100 and some odd extra pages of stories that I hadn't put out in print, and many of which hadn't been put up online either.
Right, and then this is illustrated by a variety of different artists. You do the writing, but you have different artists that you work with in this collection. Yeah,
that's right. And actually, a lot of the artists, if you read Murder Book and then look at the stuff I've done for Image or other publishers, you kind of start seeing the same names cropping up over and over again. Like the very first, which is I call it like a proto Murder Book story, was The Orchard, which is a book I did for a collection that I'd published with some friends called Acts of Violence. And that I did with Damien, who did Cluster, who did Sons of Anarchy. Then the first actual Murder Book story that carried the Murder Book title was Catching Up, which I did with Simon. And then Simon and I did 2 Murder Book stories together. And then from there, that was my first collaboration with Michael Walsh, who did Comeback, was on a Murder Book story. And then in that same issue was Vic Malhotra, who's gone on to do a lot of stuff with Image and IDW. And then the third issue, it was Michael Walsh, who he and I obviously went on to do Comeback. And then, sorry, not Michael. Michael Walsh, I already said, it was Johnny Christmas. He and I went on to do Sheltered. And then Jason Copeland was in that. He and I did a bunch of Murder Book stories together. He's done a lot of stuff for Marvel now. He's done some Daredevil, and he's done two things with Kurt Pyers over at Dark Horse. Pop and the Tomorrows, and then I think in the Dark Horse ones, Declan Shalvey, who's a guy I've been talking to for years, we finally got to work together on a story. Brian Lovell, who obviously did The Mantle, did one of those stories. J.D. Faith did another. He did a great OGN called Virgil with Steve Orlando. Mm-hmm. And then Michael Walsh came back and did another one in Dark Horse Presents, which was fun.
And in Murder Book, you did what we had discussed, the aforementioned Black and White.
Yes. Yeah. We had done, actually, some of those stories that I had done with Jason Copeland had run in as backup content in Near Death, which is, I guess, technically my first Image, sort of first time appearing in an Image book. But that we had colored them for Near Death just because we could. Like the stuff could have been printed in color, and it came out fine. But like when we went to do the trade, I wanted to just keep everything in black and white. And ideally, I am planning some more Murder Book stories, and we'll keep those all in black and white as well.
Wow, I'm glad you mentioned Near Death. That's something I'd forgotten about. That I really enjoyed that series when it came out several years ago, and it was unfortunate that it ended when it did.
It's coming back, though.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's coming back as... I'm not sure if it's coming back as a miniseries or as a standalone trade paperback, but I believe it's mostly done. I talk to Jay fairly often still, and I believe that it's mostly done. You'd have to ask him for sure. But anyway, it is coming back.
Oh, well, that's good news. This discussion of Murder Book brings us back to what we began discussing, and that is the new series, The Violent. So The Violent does, as you said, stem from your work on Murder Book.
Yes, absolutely. And originally, before I had a title for The Violent, I used to just refer to it as a Murder Book ongoing. But yeah, it's definitely, it's like an extension or like a sort of sister series, I guess, to Murder Book. It's similar in tone, similar and content, and it's just longer stories rather than these 5 to 20 page stories. The stories in The Violent will usually be around 110 page stories.
Okay, so issue number 1 is going to be coming out tomorrow from when this episode goes up, which is December 9th. And then I just checked the image site, and actually issue number 2 of The Violent comes out on the 13th of January, which is the same day that issue number 1 of Last Contract will be coming out.
That's right. You can get a 2-for that day.
That's right, a double shot of Ed Brisson.
Yes, right, yeah. And then in between there, I have 2 issues of Batman and Robin Eternal, which are coming out through DC. So, I think almost people can get a weekly dose of me if they really want to.
Well, Ed, I want to thank you for being on the Comics Alternative, talking with us about not only The Violent, but also The Last Contract.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
I want to thank Ed for taking the time to talk with me and really engaging conversation, because we had a lot of ground to cover. Obviously, I wanted to hit him up on both The Violent and The Last Contract, his 2 new series. But, I'm a big fan of Sheltered, The Field, and Comeback, so I wanted to get some discussion of those titles in as well. And that's a tall order.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. But I'm really glad that you got to talk with Ed, and hopefully hopefully you could have him on again. Yeah,
because he's definitely prolific. Yeah. So we can just wait a couple of months. He'll have something else coming out.
Yeah.
So if you want to find some of Ed Brisson's work, you could go to the website of our sponsor, and that is Discount Comic Book Service. And in fact, if you go there now and do a search on Ed Brisson, you'll find that you can get Murder Book at 40% off the cover price. You can get Comeback at 40% off, and Sheltered Volume 1 and 2 both at 40% off. The Field at 40% off. I tell you, if you want to get your Ed Brisson comics, you can't do better than going to Discount Comic Book Service. Incredible specials. But if you're a diehard fan of Amazon.com, well, you can help us out by going to our website. In fact, going to the page comicsalternative.com/Amazon and click on our Amazon Associates link and get your stuff on Amazon that way. We get a few cents kickback, and you make the 2 guys with PhDs happy.
Yep, and that's always a good thing.
That's right. You get a deal, we get a kickback. You can't go wrong with that arrangement. And whether you do get your comics through Discount Comic Book Service or Amazon.com, you have to get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you see that you can leave us a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe, or you can call us on the telephone. That phone number is 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And you want to see what we're up to online? The best way to do that is to follow us on Twitter. You can get all of the new content to the blog and news about what's going to happen on the podcast. We are at the number 2 guys with PhDs, and we thank everybody who retweets and likes our tweets.
That's right. You can also find us via email. We're 2 guys at comicsalternative.com. You can contact me directly at Derek@comicsalternative.com.
And you can contact me at Wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
We are also on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And, as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And you'll find that by going to the website, comicsalternative.com.
Yeah, so get in touch with us. Let us know how we're doing.
Yeah, and if you're wanting us to interview others in the future, well, drop us a line and give us your wish list.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, because we do like doing these interviews, and we've been doing more of them in the past several months.
Yeah, it's been quite a year for interviews.
Yeah. So until our next interview show, take care. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
See ya.